Hello, everybody. Gee, that's a well-trained bunch. Hi, my name's Mike Wilson. I'm the CEO of JDRF Australia, and welcome here to the Type 1 Summit. This is the second summit we've run. The first one was run last year in Sydney to see whether there's a helpful role we can play in connecting the community on whose behalf we work to things that are happening, things that are exciting, things that are evolving, and education and information that may be of use. So the group last year gave us a resounding yes at the end of the day, and we hope that by the end of the day you may feel the same as well. So there's a large number of components today I'll run through briefly. It's not a heavily formal day. There's not a range of things that are of the formalities type, but you'll hear from some really interesting people, hopefully inspiring you as well, and there's an enormous amount of information that you can get access to in a variety of different ways. One thing I do want to say is that we're live streaming today's event, so Alana here has the phone that's currently pointed up on stage, so be aware that's something we're putting out to a broader audience as well. It's also a very important day for other reasons, and we'll take a moment during the middle of the morning to recognise Armistice Day and the 100th anniversary of the end of the war. It's also the end of a very busy week in Melbourne for many of you and also many of JDRF. It's the end of the Spring Racing Carnival, and we were the charitable partner of the Melbourne Cup Carnival. So if you bought a pin during that carnival, all of those monies are coming towards JDRF for type 1 diabetes research. And there are a number of volunteers here today, many of whom have also been volunteering throughout the course of the entire week this week. So it's been an enormous week of contribution by the community towards JDRF, and I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you all for that. I also want to acknowledge and thank our sponsors who are here with us today, particularly Abbott. Where's the Abbott team? Put your hand up, please. Abbott. Hey. Abbott is the presenting sponsor of today's summit, as they were for last year's summit, and this sort of event isn't something we could otherwise undertake without that support. So thank you sincerely, Abbott. We also have with us good long-term partners of many types. Medtronic is here as well. Where's Medtronic team? There, somewhere down there, over there. Ypsomed has joined us this year. Where's Ypsomed? So they're here, down there. And AMSL as well is here. Yeah, there we go. The AMSL team's got a bit of spirit in them today. Also, our partners, Davies Australia, we work with them in many ways on many fronts, increasingly closely on everything from policy to advocacy to education to research, and that's a really good sign of an increasing working relationship. And Aussie Loopers are here. Where are the Aussie Looper team? They're outside getting ready, I think. So Aussie Loopers are here as well to share with you an insight into another part of the emerging diabetes technology landscape that may be of interest to some of you. We also have here representatives of the research community and of a range of clinical trials. So where's Pauline and where are the... where's Pauline? Getting ready somewhere, good. And the research community, we had Professor Tom Kay, there we go, Professor Tom Kay and John Wentworth down here. Two of Australia's leading researchers, both based in Melbourne. Have a chance to speak to them if you want to get really excited about the future of research in type 1 diabetes. Have a chat to them if you want to get really inspired by the size of their brains and how much effort is being put in towards type 1 diabetes research. And Pauline, you'll see as a JDRF staff member and other volunteers, are trying to collect your interest in involvement in clinical trials. It is absolutely criminal that one of the greatest delays in getting good research done, other than getting funding and having a good scientific idea, is recruiting people to clinical trials. There are hundreds of thousands of people who can see the benefit of it. There are scientists with trials that are ready to go, and that mix and match just doesn't happen as easily as it should. So you can put your name down today so that we can contact you and direct you towards some of those trials so they might happen a bit faster and get to the results we all want a bit more quickly than would otherwise be the case. So there's a number of things to sign up for out there. The sessions run throughout the course of the day. If you haven't had a chance to get to the table you wanted to speak to, you'll get a chance to do that during the breaks and in between times as well. Bathrooms at the end of the corridor as you exit this doorway, as is tea and coffee, and there'll be food available throughout. And there's a range of JDRF volunteers. Give up some noise, JDRF volunteers. There we go. And staff members who are happy to help in many, many ways. So we're going to start with a few speakers this morning before the breakout groups I think you're all aware of and have signed up for. Before we do that, we're going to throw to a video from JDRF's Global Chief Mission Officer, Dr. Erin Kowalski. He may be familiar to some of you and maybe not to others. He is one of the most passionate advocates for type 1 diabetes research in the world and most informed. He has type 1 diabetes, as does his brother. He's based in New York, but he's got to give us an oversight briefly of some of the exciting things happening on the JDRF global research landscape. So please, a video from Dr. Erin Kowalski.
Hey everyone, it's Dr. Erin Kowalski, JDRF's Chief Mission Officer. I'm here in New York, but wishing I was there in Melbourne with you at the summit today. What a day you're going to have. I was fortunate to be there last year and it was fantastic. My brother and I have lived with type 1 diabetes for many years, and I'm a scientist here at JDRF heading up our research and policy programs, and I've never been more optimistic about the progress that we're making. On every front that we're working, we're making incredible progress. Australia plays a huge role in this. Across your country, cutting-edge, pivotal work is happening that's moving our mission forward. From the work of Tim Jones and his team in WA on artificial pancreas devices and hypoglycemia. Right there in Melbourne, you have incredible Dr. Mark Cooper, one of the world's best nephrologists working on diabetes nephropathy. Sydney, Adelaide, Brisbane, all leading the charge to cure, to prevent, and to better treat type 1 diabetes, keep people healthy until we're walking away from this disease. Today, you're gonna have an amazing experience. You're gonna hear about this cutting edge research. You're gonna hear about participating in clinical trials. You have some really important clinical trials happening in Australia right now that are gonna move the mission forward and drive us to a cure faster. You're gonna hear from some of the world's experts. You'll get to meet other families. I encourage you to talk to folks there. You may be able to help somebody who's going through a hard time. You may be able to lean on somebody's shoulders who's walked in front of you, so to speak, with their diabetes. It's really just a great day. Rebecca Davies, an amazing friend. I know you're there. I wish I could be there with you. It's cold up here. It's fall and turning into winter. Melbourne is one of my favorite cities in the world. You're very lucky to live in such a beautiful place. But really, you're part of a community that's going to help us achieve our mission and cure type 1 diabetes. So I thank you for being there. I thank you for participating. Don't hesitate to be in touch. And I hope I see you in Australia sometime soon. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
So Aaron's a great friend of JDRF Australia. He referenced the community. I think we look around this room and unusually for some of you perhaps, you're surrounded by people who deeply understand something that's with you almost every day, almost non-stop, almost unbroken, in a way that most rooms wouldn't. And this is a chance for you hopefully to gain a great deal out of the collection of information and knowledge that we've brought together. I look at this room and I see the community that sustains us as JDRF. You're the reason we exist, you formed us, you motivate us, you support us, you inspire us, and you drive us to continue to try moving things forward every day, even more quickly than would otherwise be possible. And someone who's led the charge in JDRF Australia in making that happen over a number of decades is Rebecca Davies AO. So I'm going to invite Rebecca to speak, but she is a director of JDRF Australia and has been for many, many years. She's also on the board of JDRF International in New York. She's the chair of our research committee here, and she's on the research committee there. Many years ago, she was everything from the editor of our newsletter when we had a physical newsletter. She's on a number of committees of the National Health and Medical Research Council. She's on a number of non-profit boards and Medical Research Institute boards. She's also been the chair of the Heart Foundation in New South Wales after and in parallel with an incredibly successful career as a corporate lawyer and in administration of the law firm she was part of. So we're extremely lucky to have Rebecca as part of the JDRF team. She's a deeply, deeply passionate member. She's got a beautiful, well, when I first met, young school-age daughter who's now a lovely young adult teacher, Emily, who inspires her every day to continue her activities with the type 1 diabetes community. And it's been recognised more broadly than just this room with her recognition in the Order of Australia Awards with an Order of Australia. So please join me in welcoming Rebecca Davies to speak to you.
What a build-up. That's kind of embarrassing, actually. But thank you in any event. And it's just, I mean, when I came in this morning, the buzz was just so extraordinary out there. And as Mike says, it's really what it's all about for those of us who are trying to make a difference, not only for our own families, but all families. So can I first, however, acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today and pay respects to elders past and present, and particularly today for those Indigenous brothers and sisters who have been involved in war, in medicine, in our community services. We really pay respects to those people. And it might be also appropriate to pay respects to the elders of our community as well, those who set up JDRF in Australia many years ago with a particular vision to get rid of this condition, and to honour those that we've lost on the way, including, we've just had some very sad news this week about one of the members of our community who died far too young. That's what it's really about, trying to make sure that doesn't happen. So I've been asked just perhaps to tell you my story, and it's not because it's a particularly special story, it's a story that I think probably elements of it anyway are going to be the same as the story that you had. So wind the clock back, and I've got 2 young children. One's is 2, the other one's 6 months old. I've just gone back to work after being on maternity leave, and my 2-year-old Emily, she had plenty of reasons to be a bit out of sorts. So mum had been home, mum's now back at work. We were living in a rented house because we were in between accommodations, so she was somewhere where she wasn't used to. She'd started daycare, which was a new thing for her, and she just was a bit out of sorts and a bit whingy at night. And I put her down to all these things. But after a little while, I thought, maybe she's not so well. Give her some Panadol. I shouldn't advertise a brand, but all parents know there are a lot of things that kids get. Give them some Panadol and like magic, a few hours later, they're running around just like normal. But this time that didn't happen. So I thought, okay, better go and see the GP. So I go and see the GP, and the GP says, she's probably got a virus, give it some time. I'm seeing some nods. I think people have had similar experiences. Anyway, so she says, just wait. So we wait. Emily's not really getting much better. So I go back again and told again, wait a bit longer. She's waking up in the middle of the night all the time, wanting something to drink. Okay, so you give her something to drink, sometimes, in fact, quite often juice. With the benefit of hindsight, that was perhaps not the best thing. Anyway, and she was going through nappies at an unbelievable rate. And again, I thought, that figures because she's waking up and drinking, so that's why all the nappies. So I go back to the doctor again, and she says, well, what you need is a clean urine sample. Come back with a clean urine sample because maybe she's got a urinary tract infection. So I'm thinking, okay, now how do you do that? I've got a 2-year-old in nappies and it's a girl. This is not that easy. So anyway, some more time goes on because I'm thinking this is all too hard. She's still not all that well, but things happen sometimes slowly and you don't always notice the changes that are occurring. But it got to be one Sunday morning and Emily was so lethargic, she wouldn't really even walk or do anything. And we were having a picnic in the park and Emily I remember she was grabbing at the dried fruit that we had sort of there as part of the picnic. And one of the other mothers said to me, maybe you should take her to the hospital because the children's hospital, fortunately, was just around the corner. So we did that. I'm feeling really guilty as I walk into casualty thinking, I shouldn't be taking up public services because I can afford to go to a private doctor and I could go to my GP tomorrow, which is Monday. Anyway, go into casualty and the triage nurse looks at Emily and she says, I think we might bump her up the queue. And this is just, all the other kids there with broken bits and pieces and splinters and fevers and whatever, and Emily gets bumped up the queue. And I think, this is a bit interesting. My husband and my son had gone off to do the weekly vegetable shopping. So you can see the level of anxiety there was. It was sort of not that high at this point. Go in and see one of the young interns, who was the sort of first medical person. Told him exactly the same story I had told over and over and over to the GP. And he said, I think we'll do a blood test. So that was the first of the finger pricks. Anyway, the results, in those days it took a little while, so the results come back and all hell broke loose. There were doctors, there were trolleys, there were, like the whole thing just went berserk. And we were into intensive care with Emily being stuck with, tubes everywhere and the whole thing, etc. At this stage, it's kind of late afternoon, so my husband and my son went home. I stayed with Emily every few hours through the next, 15, 16 hours. She was, there were more blood tests taken. And what the nursing staff said was, make sure you talk to her each time they did a blood test. She would have slept through, but we had to wake her up and I had to talk to her, make sure she could still recite the alphabet or do something like that. I didn't really think too much about it at that stage. Anyway, the morning came. This was a pretty tough night, I have to say. And Emily sat up in bed and she said, I want some toast. And I thought, I just felt a real sense of relief that she was just being a little bit more normal. And then a couple of hours later, the endocrinologist came in and she said, Emily's got type 1 diabetes, and I actually didn't think she was going to make it. She'd had the highest blood sugar ever recorded at that hospital, which was 54. Now, I don't know whether anyone can beat that. That's not exactly a number that you want to beat, but the reason it was so dangerous is that trying to bring that down to a more normal level was something that had to be done really carefully, because if you do it too fast, it's, brain damage territory. And that was why they wanted me to talk to her every few hours to make sure her brain was working okay. Anyway, I knew nothing about type 1 diabetes. It was the most extraordinary experience, and I just think, someone was looking after us, because if I'd have left it to the Monday, the story might have been quite different. Now, take things forward, and as Mike says, and by the way, happy birthday, Mike. It's Mike's birthday today. So, yeah. So that's dedication to be here on his birthday as well. But Emily's now 27. She's a high school history teacher, and she sometimes has kids in her class with type 1. And she was telling me that there was one time she's in the middle of explaining something about Tudor England or something, and the pump goes off, and so there's the question between her and her student as to whose pump it was. I thought that was, that's sort of telling you that the world has changed. There's so many things, if I think about what we've achieved over the last 25 years, whatever it is. Better insulins. The insulins we had when Emily was first diagnosed, and I know they're a lot better than the ones 20 years earlier, but again, for those of you with toddlers, you had to wake them up, do a finger prick, wait for 2 minutes to get the result, give them their dose of insulin, and then you had to wait half an hour before they could eat anything. So try telling a 2-year-old that they can't eat anything. And, things like celery and carrots don't do it. So we've come a long way with all those things. She's got a CGM, she's got a pump. Those things I can tell you as a parent. I don't care that she's 27, she's a grown-up, but I still worry about her. So knowing that she's got that technology really does make a big difference. So I thank the scientists that are really working hard for making this disease go away, primarily, making sure that we keep healthy on the way, that we can manage this condition. I think that's just fantastic. I thank the staff of JDRF. Erin, who was on that video, he's a great friend to us all. I probably see Erin as much as I see Mike, actually. I do spend a lot of time on the other side of the world, which is, there are some pluses in doing that, I would say. But the JDRF staff, both here and internationally, are fabulous. But most importantly, it's you guys. This is the community that matters. This is why we're working on trying to get rid of this. I know that in this room, you're going to take the flag forward and make sure we get rid of this disease at some point. I don't know how long that's going to be. When Emily was first diagnosed, they were talking about it being all done in the next 5 years. I kind of have learnt over the years a few things. One is that mice are different to people. So we got really good at curing mice, but people are a bit more complicated. And that this disease perhaps is really not one disease, it might be multiple diseases. So the story that each of us have might be a bit different, so the way that we deal with it might be a bit different too. But give yourselves all a big cheer. It's a massive effort that you're going through. It's wonderful to see so many of you here today, and enjoy the summit. I think I'm going to learn, I know, and it's going to be great fun. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca, for so generously sharing your story. You mentioned in the middle of that the increasing role and benefit that technology is playing in Emily's life and hopefully in the lives of many of those here today. And we kindly have someone else who's prepared to share their story with us, including the benefit of technology and the impact on their type 1 diabetes. So I'd like to invite to the stage Alana Hearne. Alana was diagnosed 21 years ago. She's a model, a blogger and an avid traveller, and she's going to share some of her story with us as well. Alana?
Hi everyone. I'm here to share my experience, my 21 extra years, which is what I call my years since diagnosis. It's the extra years that I've been gifted through modern medicine. So here's my story. Right, so I was diagnosed in December 97. I've been using flash glucose monitoring for the last 2 years. And I'm feeling pretty good about my management at the moment. I think I'm doing pretty well. I think part of the reason that I'm doing so well is because I let myself not be too perfect. So this is where I'm at now. But I haven't always been this good at it. This is where I was for the first 19 years of my diabetic life. Darkness. I had no idea what my blood sugar was doing, and it's not a good place to be when that's how you work out how much medication to take. So this is me, completely clueless. I knew absolutely nothing about diabetes when I was first diagnosed, and I really, after the first needle, I thought, it's going to be easy. I thought I got this. It's my new party trick. Every time I eat food, I inject insulin and everything's fine. So that's how simple I thought diabetes was, and things have changed for me a little bit over the years. I haven't been doing very well with it. In the first 19 years, I was terrified to go and see the diabetes centre. I was just terrified to see my educator because I knew I'd get in trouble, and I think the thing that I feared the most was that talk that you have, the talk about the complications. Your A1C is too high. So I used to always kind of hope that I had enough hypos in that 3-month period so that I could get my average down. So I just wanted to be, I just wanted my numbers to be good. I wasn't so concerned about my health. I just didn't want to get in trouble. So now, I've turned the lights on. I'm using flash glucose monitoring now. So I kind of liken this experience to sort of standing in a dark room and someone flicks the lights on and you just kind of look around and go, wow, this is really messy. There's so much mess here, I don't know where to start. I don't know how to start cleaning this up. So this was my first lesson. Lesson 1. So I was taking way too much basal insulin. This was my first overnight reading, and as you can see, I've gone to bed at 10 and I've woken up at 8.2, and in the middle I've just dropped right down lower than you can go. And from this I learned that I was taking way too much basal. I was actually taking 19 units of basal a day when I did this reading, and I reduced it down to 13 units a day. So that was the first time I realised that there was something really going wrong with my management. The second lesson, I was getting all my bolus wrong. I didn't know my carb ratio because I was taking too much long-acting insulin. I was testing and I'd be low before my meals, and then I'd be, I didn't know what was happening with my humalog. So I just, this is when I found out. Pad CU is not great for me. I stopped eating Pad CU after that. See you never. So yeah, this is me learning carb ratios through flash glucose monitoring. The third thing I learned about was this amazing community. So I think I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. I think there's a whole lot of people here that know how important community is. And this is my little group of friends in Sydney. Sian had just arrived from Toronto. This is Sian here. So she had come over from Toronto, and someone told us on Instagram, or someone tagged me in a little post that said she was looking for people to hang out with in Sydney. And within 48 hours, I had this little group of friends gather for brunch. And so we all welcomed Sian to Sydney, and Sian and Daniela are now diabesties. So Sian went and visited, Daniela went and visited Sian in Toronto just recently, so things are going pretty well. These are just a few little things I learned from the online community. Some of it I'm sure I was told by my diabetes educator, but I think when you're around peers and you see people actually actively doing these things, it kind of sinks in a little bit more. So I wanted to talk about compression lows. So when I fall asleep sometimes, if I sleep on my sensor, I can get a little overnight low that isn't a real low. And sometimes after a shower, that can be a little bit heat sensitive. So so I can get a false high from showers. And also, just applying a sensor 24 hours before use kind of improves the first day accuracy. This is what I've been learning about my basal. So your basal needs can kind of change a little bit. So the first graph is where things were going horribly wrong for me. I don't know, it's less carby meals and more kind of taking too little basal. And so the slide on the right there, the picture on the right there is me just doing some low carb eating and getting my basal nice and steady. So that's how I deal with that. This is my favourite lesson, and this one is the hardest one for me to stick with because I look at hypos as kind of an opportunity to have something that I shouldn't really be eating. So I just like to have something sweet, I don't want to waste all that. I don't want to waste that low or waste that insulin with glucose tablets, but they absolutely are. That's how you get out of danger. So, treating your hypos with glucose is just the best thing for them, and cakes and things we'll deal with later. So that is me in my favourite cupcake shop, pre-bolusing for my cupcake. So I have done research and learned how to eat my favourite foods, learned how to bolus for my favourite foods. So with that one, I choose my cupcake, I have my needle, I drive home, I make myself a cup of tea, I enjoy my cupcake, and I go for a walk after. And that's how I deal with the cupcake spike. Chocolate's always different. So this is where I am now. I store all my information on my phone. That's what we do, isn't it? We kind of store and share and gain information with our phones. So I'm using the app now with my sensor. And it just helps me to share my information a little bit easier. It's free, and we all know how many things we have to carry as diabetics, so for me it's just that one less thing to carry. I think this is the most important thing. This is what has helped me the most over the years. This is what helps me sort of keep my positive attitude. I know I'm not perfect. I let myself make mistakes. I feel confident that I can fix my mistakes if I need to. And I think we're all a little bit hard on ourselves sometimes. It never used to occur to me to blame my equipment. I always thought that it was me that had done something wrong, but sometimes it's your insulin, sometimes your meter can be wrong. There's all these different things that can go wrong. And also nutritional information isn't always right, so let yourself make mistakes. And now I'm just going to introduce you to a few members of my little community, a few people that I've met online, my little buddy collection. This is Marie. She's from Texas. She came out here the beginning of 2017, and she was the first diabetic that I met through Instagram. She was out here studying, and she just ran a New York City marathon, so she's pretty amazing. I'm really proud of her. This is Daniela. Daniela and I eat carbs together. The reason I met Daniela was because she's a passionate advocate for blood donation, and I didn't know that you could give blood as a diabetic, so she kind of opened my eyes to that. You just you need to get a letter from your doctor, but it is something that you can do as a diabetic, and I'm not sure if everyone knows that, but I didn't know it at the time. Oh, this is one of my favourite stories. So Jeremy put a post up on Instagram saying, would anyone be interested in going on a joy flight? And it was a Wednesday morning he wanted to go, so I could go in before work. I said yes, absolutely. So 4 of us type 1 diabetics all met at Bankstown Airport on a Wednesday morning, and we flew up to Palm Beach and then went to work after. So I just think this is a really cool thing about the community. We all get to do some pretty amazing things. Jeremy has been a pilot for 20 years and has been diabetic for 8 years. And this is George. I don't know, you may recognise George from the forums. He's very knowledgeable, really smart guy. I've learned a lot of what I know now from George. He actually helped me put this presentation together, so I've got George to thank for this. That is my life with T1D, and that's how I'm coping with it now. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alana. That's a terrific job. It's always so hard to share such a personal story. You did it very, very well, and it's a nerve-wracking experience to be up here. So thank you. And for those of you who'd like to speak to Alana personally, she'll be on the Abbott table throughout the course of the rest of the day as well. So go and have a chance to talk to her further and see her face to face as well. So now we move on to a part of the morning that links to something I mentioned before about clinical trials. And we're fortunate to have a number of members of the type 1 diabetes research community here with us today, led by Professor Tom Kay. Tom's Executive Director of the St Vincent's Institute of Medical Research, and we'll convene a panel that'll talk a little bit about clinical trials and clinical research, and then we'll have a Q&A session. And I encourage you to take advantage of the fact that we do have some of the best minds of type 1 diabetes research in the world in the room here today. Tom and his colleagues have had a variety of roles, not just in Australian research leadership, but in global type 1 diabetes research leadership. They're part of the reason that Aaron was able to stand in his video and say Australia punches way above its weight. And that all stems from a lot of work being done in Melbourne, a lot of which is being done by this group of researchers. So please welcome Professor Tom Kay, who'll introduce the panel for this discussion.
Good morning, welcome everybody. So we're going to move through this as quickly as possible. I'll say just a couple of words about me because I think that it's worth knowing. A lot of people say, oh, how did you get into type 1 diabetes? I'm an endocrinologist by background. I've been working in diabetes research for about 30 years, so that's a very long time. And I probably got into it partly because I enjoyed working in the area of diabetes as a junior doctor, and because I had lots of terrific mentors and role models that encouraged me to go into that field. Now, the big message I would put to you is that, we've heard a lot of good things this morning from Rebecca, from Mike, from Erin on the video about the benefits of research, sometimes also the frustrations. It takes longer than you think. The important thing to recognise is that with most major diseases, there's an enormous change. And someone at my stage of my working life, I can look back and think, what was it like? How diabetes was treated when I was a resident medical doctor and working in a hospital? And there's been enormous change over that time, both in how diabetes is treated and also in our understanding of how type 1 diabetes comes about. And that change all comes through research. That's the only way it happens. And as we've heard from Erin, a lot of that research happens right here in Australia. And as we heard from Rebecca, that can only happen, and Mike, that can only happen if people participate in research, because we're not about curing mouse diabetes, we're about curing human diabetes. So that therefore really means that the community needs to be involved and right behind these things. We know that there'll be enormous changes in a working lifetime, and that will continue to go on, and those things will benefit you and your children over the next decades, and that's really what research is all about, thinking about improvements in medicine. Now, I think we need the panel up on the stage. Everyone come on up, and then I think what we'll do is get them to say a couple of words each about their backgrounds. And so while people are coming up, maybe we can start with John. But we need everybody up here, yes, to sit on the seats. Great. Okay, so, and I'm going to be a tough and cruel chair and keep us moving through that. So let's make it short and snappy.
Thanks, Tom. So I'm John Wentworth. I'm based at Royal Melbourne and Walter and Eliza Hall Institute. I'm a diabetes specialist. My main area of interest is in immune therapies that turn off the immune attack that causes type 1 diabetes, and we're working on a number of human trials, the most important ones being TrialNet and Endaya, where we're trying to both help people who are just diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, but also people who we know are going to get type 1 diabetes by virtue of the fact that they have antibodies in their blood. And that's all I'll say at this stage.
Thank you. Thank you. My name's Katrina Sims. I am the Project Portfolio Manager for the University of Melbourne St Vincent's Hospital Diabetes Research Technology Group, working very closely with Professor David O'Neill. I'm also the Research Coordinator for the Adult Hybrid Closed Loop Study, which is a study across 7 sites across Australia, working in parallel with a paediatric study as well, working on the hybrid closed loop artificial pancreas and investigating several other studies involving hypoglycemia unawareness as well as exercise in type 1.
Hi, I'm Shannon Ryan. I'm a type 1 diabetic, have been for 32 years, and our young daughters Audra and Eden here with us today are part of the India study, and so we're here as a little family to ask if anyone's got any questions and speak about our experiences.
Hello everyone, my name's Ilona, I'm Shannon's wife, obviously mum to these 2 gorgeous little girls. My background is actually as a nurse, so I understand the importance of clinical trials and research and helping find a cure and treatment. And obviously there's a passion there with my husband and my brother-in-law having type 1 diabetes too to get these girls involved. So you guys do a wonderful job.
My name is Belinda. I'm one of the research nurses who works with Awesome Families. I get to do home visits to these kids over here who are doing an amazing job in the study, providing us with all sorts of wonderful samples. And I also get to work with some of the TrialNet kids as well. Some of the kids in India they were born a little bit before the India study came about, so they've come into TrialNet after the second child's come into India.
And I'm Louise Ginnivan, and I've got a few areas here that I cover. I've had type 1 diabetes for since the 70s, and I was the one and only until my 18-month-old grandchild. He was 18 months when he was diagnosed with type 1. So we were one of, unlike your daughter Emily, we picked it up. We were very early on, and he was the most well diagnosed children's at the time, I have to say, only showing 1.4 ketones. So I'm also a diabetes educator, and I have been taking part in clinical trials for type 1 diabetes since the 80s. and currently the very exciting closed loop studies. So.
All right, we've heard lots of interesting things there. Maybe we've heard just then about one of the main benefits of being involved in some of these programs, the notion of early diagnosis. So would you say that was a benefit for your family, knowing a bit about diabetes from your knowledge and so on?
Yes, all three of my children during the 80s were in research at the Royal Melbourne to do with genetic typing for type 1 diabetes, and none of them show any inclination to have any of those genes. So in fact what they believe has happened is there is rheumatoid arthritis, there are other autoimmune conditions on the other side of the family also, so we don't know exactly. I always felt I was responsible, but we don't actually know, and you know, that's a silly thing to even contemplate, because it's management that we want. And also, the reason I believe the reason I'm so fit and healthy is my involvement in trials for now over 30 years.
Okay, so there are three main sorts of trials represented by the people who are on the panel. There's the device trials, which we heard a bit about from Katrina, to do with testing new pumps and new glucose monitoring systems. There's the trials of immune-related therapy that John mentioned, and then there's this study that people either call India or India, depending on who they are exactly. It looks like India, but with an E at the start. So I think we need just a couple of minutes on the purpose of each of those. Maybe, John, you can kick us off by saying, what's the purpose of those immune therapy trials that you were talking about? What are they all about?
So they're about hitting diabetes, type 1 diabetes at the source. So rather than treating it as a metabolic problem where the glucose levels are high, you're actually going to the heart of the problem, which is the immune system is very specifically attacking the pancreatic beta cell, the cell that makes insulin in the body. So I guess it's a vision we have that we can treat it as it is, as an immune disease, and find safe and effective immune therapies to turn that attack off. And that's the vision of the research we do. We are very slow, I guess, in evolving our immune therapies, and that's partly because of the challenge we have in the disease. It evolves relatively slowly, particularly in what we call the preclinical space, which is the people who we know are going to get type 1 diabetes but who don't have it yet, and we don't know whether it's going to happen in a year or in 10 years' time. So our mission, though, is targeting that very source of the disease. It's informed by a lot of the other studies, including Endia, that are trying to tell us about what it is that kicks the disease off in some people but not in others. And we have realised over the last couple of decades that we need to do this as an international community because it is such a challenge and we need such large numbers of participants. And so we're joining forces with a number of centres around the world to try and achieve that end. I hope that answers the question.
Yep. So now I think we might hear a bit about what Endia is all about. Belinda, what's the goal of Endia? What are you trying to achieve?
So with Endia, we're trying to look into the environmental and the genetic triggers of why we're seeing children at risk of developing type 1 develop antibodies. What we're doing is following ideally pregnant women through from...
So does everybody, just to butt in there, just because I think there's quite a lot of jargon in all of this,
Yeah.
Does everyone understand that autoantibodies that are being referred to, they are markers in the bloodstream showing that the immune system is attacking the pancreatic beta cell, and they occur many years before they develop many years usually before the actual onset of high blood glucose levels. So we use them in the field as a way of saying, in the future, this person might develop diabetes. And if you have a couple of these autoantibodies develop, you've got about an 80% chance of developing diabetes over the next many years. And most people at the time they develop diabetes have got these autoantibodies. So tell us a bit about how NDIA works then. What happens?
So when I first start speaking to a family about the NDIA study, basically what I'm explaining to them is that we've currently, I checked on our website today, we've got 1,183 babies in the study all around the country, which is phenomenal. So big clap to all of our families and the rest of the country and JDRF. What we're then doing is collecting a whole lot of environmental samples, including genetic samples. So we collect wheeze and poos and saliva, skin swabs, mouth swabs, blood tests if the parents are happy to do the blood tests, colostrum, breast milk. Out of that 1,183 babies in the study, we've had 8 children develop type 1 diabetes. So they're no longer in the study, but we have a number of other children who continue to be in the NDIA study, and some of them also go on to going into the TrialNet study because we want to watch their development of antibodies very closely with the blood tests that we do. But we're also trying to look at all the environmental samples that they're collecting for us to work out what is it in every single child's environmental world and their genetic world, which is measured through the saliva, that's either stopping those antibodies from becoming type 1 like we know it, where we have abnormal blood sugars and the requirement for insulin, or not stopping some of those kids and they do go on to develop type 1 diabetes. And that's what we're doing with all the environmental samples. So there's something in every child's world that has developed antibodies but hasn't developed type 1 that's just keeping those antibodies staying exactly the way they are. But in some other children's world, there aren't. So is it something to do with their viral triggers, or is it something to do with the gut microbiome? Is it something to do with the breast milk? Is it something to do with their genes?
Right, so maybe let's just summarise that a little bit again. So NDIA is a study to do with understanding how type 1 diabetes comes about. And it starts with family members of people with diabetes. It actually starts during pregnancy. So when a family that's got type 1 diabetes in the family, they enrol in the study during a pregnancy, and then that pregnancy is followed, collecting various samples from the mum, and then after the birth of the baby, samples are collected from the baby. Those babies born to families with type 1 families with type 1 diabetes have an increased risk of developing diabetes, about a 10-fold increased risk compared with the general population, but still quite a low risk, perhaps only a risk of 1 in 20 or so of developing diabetes. So a low risk, but more common than in the general community. So this is a very interesting population, which of course you are all members of people where we can try and study in early childhood what it is that builds on the genetic background, the genetic risk that people have, and actually causes diabetes to develop. And this is a fantastic national study led by Jenny Cooper in Adelaide, Len Harrison in Melbourne, and their colleagues that is very successful, as we heard, at enrolling families. But if there are any pregnancies in the room and anyone's interested in or possible pregnancies coming up, then Belinda's a very good person to contact, because NDIA is still enrolling subjects, and it's a study that's going really, really well. Now, Katrina, tell us about the goal of your research.
The goal of our research is to investigate the technology that is available at the moment in Australia, but the next generation of insulin pump with continuous glucose monitoring. So the study that we have is we're looking at a device that's not commercially available, that is it will be, but we're looking at the impact of it with the management of glycemia, but we're also looking at other things as well, biomarkers. We're looking at the ECGs of the participants. We're looking at their sleep quality. We're also looking at their the impact of the equipment and the equipment on their psychological status as well, and their understanding of how that improves their quality of life. So this is a study that is spread over a 3-year period with 120 people in the study in the adult protocol, and they're covering across Australia. So we have people who are on multiple daily injections and on pumps that come into the study and then are randomised to either a control of their current modality, or they go on to the hybrid closed loop for the 6 months period of time. So they also get involved with the dietitians in the early stages of the study to learn how to carbohydrate count, which is incredibly important, as we know. And then they also get involved with diabetes educators and clinicians the whole way through the study. So it's a very important study for all of us to see the impact of how the closed loop system is working, and also whether the algorithm needs to be worked upon back in the engineering departments of the various companies to improve that, so that we're getting people in closed loop for a longer period of time.
So the Australian healthcare system are early adopters internationally in many fields, and in these closed loop new devices for delivering insulin, it's no exception. There's very strong leadership in that kind of research in Australia. You heard from Aaron, I think, that Tim Jones in Perth is one of the world's leaders in using this kind of technology in children, and David O'Neill and Katrina, their team is one of the world's leaders in using this kind of technology in adults. Now I think we're going to ask Shannon and Alana to comment on what it's like for their family to be involved in research, why they decided to do it, and whether the experience has been worthwhile so far.
Thank you. So obviously the reason why we're involved is, as I said before, we're quite passionate with diabetes being in the family, and if we can do anything, if we can do our bit to help contribute to a cure, help contribute to better treatments, then we're all for that. It's a really simple process. It's certainly no hassle at all. The girls always love seeing the NDA nurses. NDA nurses are fantastic with kids. If you're a little bit concerned that, I don't know how my kids are going to go, they're going to be able to get the samples. The nurses know how to get the samples out of them, so don't stress. I think that's probably it, really.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Louise, what about saying something about what it's been like to be in these new pump trials? Is that scary, using a device that really isn't on the market yet and is still being tested?
I don't feel it's scary when you're in the environment that we were in. We had a week in a hotel. It was a week off, basically. We did have a few very disturbed nights when they were taking specimens all night, but I was blown away. I know nothing's perfect, but the particular trial completely, I don't get upset about too many things, and I feel I do have the extra incentive of the noise beside me, and that's why I continue to be very keen to be involved. But it completely looked after all my background basal insulin in a beautiful way, and we were actually, that current one was actually looking at it coping with the meals as well, and that was pretty amazing. We had a set amount of carbohydrate we ate, and it just had a look at how it coped with that, and really that was amazing. All week I had I think only one hypo, and that was, it wasn't bad, it was only a mild one, and that was when it was trying to cope with me. We went for I think nearly a 2-hour walk, and I think I got away with about an hour, but the second hour it just wasn't coping with that change. But I wouldn't almost expect any pump to have to deal with that. So it's wonderful seeing what is coming. So our lives will be much easier to manage.
So maybe these are some of the things we might want to tease out in the discussion. To me, some of the benefits of being involved in research studies are the close contact with experts in the field, which I think we heard a little bit about from Alana. The opportunity to see what amazing things are coming down the pipeline, what sort of things are possible in the future for diabetes, and possibly sometimes some benefits for your own diabetes. Or your family's diabetes. One of the benefits of being in a study like Endia, for example, is that young children are being monitored quite carefully, and it's really extremely unlikely that any of those kids enrolled in that study would wind up in Emily's situation with ketoacidosis at the time of diagnosis. That kids in that study would be shown to have diabetes way before they got to the stage of actually being unwell. So there are some real pluses there. Now, what are the risks? I mean, the risks of being in studies, I think that we as researchers, we're very conscious of risk, and ethics committees and so on put us through the hoops in terms of making sure that what we're trying to do is safe. But of course it does involve people being prepared to try things which are not yet fully validated. So there is perhaps a little bit of risk. What are the other risks? Is some risks of it being burdensome or time consuming. We heard from Alana that she doesn't feel that is the case for children. There's this other possible risk of sort of feeling like a guinea pig. People are experimenting on me. It's not for my benefit. It's for their benefit, kind of thing. And I honestly think that the benefits really outweigh those concerns. We've heard a little bit that part of the reason people enrol in studies is to help others, to help the community, help future people with diabetes, as well as purely for themselves. And it is this sort of sense of altruism or helping the community that is pretty important. Maybe we want to now open it up to the floor for questions. I know everyone here would be very happy to answer questions, and be really good to get some questions from the floor.
Mine's an easy question. I just wanted to know how the new pump. My name's Amal. I have Maddie, who's 13 and has type 1. Just wanted to know how the new pump is different from the existing Medtronic and other pumps that are on the market at the moment.
Well, maybe Katrina's the best person to comment on that.
So the one that we're investigating is first generation of the 670 device, which is a Medtronic device, and the one that will be commercial will be a different one to what we're investigating. But basically the difference between the two, the one that's currently available and the one that we're investigating, is that when the background infusion is taken over by the algorithm, so pretty much the pump is delivering insulin in micro boluses as basal rate. So it's delivering small amounts of insulin, looking at what historically has happened from the person wearing the pump, the history, and then predicting what it's going to do. So it's actually basically delivering small amounts of bolus as basal. So therefore the glucose levels are maintained within a range as long as possible, and the sensor is the component that is integral to maintaining the person in that closed loop.
Okay, did everyone understand that? Okay, so it's still a hybrid system though, is that right? In the sense that people still...
It's not completely automated at all. You still need, you can come out of closed loop for certain reasons, and you still need to look at your food and deliver the carbohydrate amount whilst you're wearing the pump. That is, it does manage part of that, but in actual fact you still have to use your brain a lot to still wear this device. It's not fully automated.
Yes, so the current systems that are being tested, there's quite a conservative program of testing closed loop delivery systems. They're called hybrid systems because they mostly at this stage require people to use bolus doses at the time of meals and exercise. Any other questions? Yes, please.
I have a daughter who's particularly sporty. Is there any thought of the pumps actually having insulin and glucose so it could balance them out? Because I feel if she was in a closed loop, they mightn't know that Thursday's rowing day or whatever, and so it might look at Tuesday and Wednesday's history and bring her lower than she actually needs to be. Whereas if it could balance it out with the the two sides of the equation, I wonder if that's actually easier.
I think again a question for Katrina or John.
So, look, my understanding of the closed loop is that it's more working on an hour-by-hour basis, so it's usually pretty good at picking up exercise. But there are also pumps in development where they're giving not glucose but glucagon along with insulin, and so glucagon is the anti-insulin, if you like, and it's the thing that drives ketosis, but it also tells the liver to pump out some glucose, particularly when you're exercising. And I haven't seen anything in mainstream use yet, but people are working on that concept, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes, because as you may know, glucagon is the thing we use to get out of a severe hypo as well, and so that's how they're addressing that issue.
And can I just add to that? What we're finding is, particularly in closed loop or hybrid closed loop, the overnight we're seeing really good results overnight. Clearly, because we're not influencing the overnight with food, with exercise. So we are seeing a much better outcome with the range of glycemia in the overnight phase. And then what we want to do is try and replicate that as we move forward and learn more, and the algorithms get better into the day phase.
Any other questions? Yep.
My name is Jay. I've got a 7-year-old daughter with type 1 diabetes. As it was mentioned before, we have come a long way with Thank you. With the improvement in the insulin research and trials, I read it before. There's a trial happening with long-acting insulin. Like once we inject it, it can go for a week or months. So where are we sitting with those sort of research, and when are we expecting some result coming?
John, do you want to do that?
I don't actually know for sure, but I know that there are people interested in. So this is an issue: is can we have a long-acting insulin that you just administer once a month or once a week, or think something like that? And I know people are looking into that in terms of either sort of depot pellets that you could put under the skin, or sometimes sort of these patch pumps where it's not necessarily an injection or a needle that sits under the skin, but just a patch of insulin that slowly gets absorbed into the skin. But these things are all they're all in very early stage development, and again, I'm not aware of anything that's close to real-time use in that regard. So I think we're still looking at least a daily basal injection if you're on injection therapy.
Yes, so maybe I'd just add something to that. That the challenge in type 1 diabetes treatment is that is mimicking what the body's own systems do. Now, the body's own systems for handling blood glucose are absolutely incredible, and all of you know that because you can see that they're not so good when insulin and the pancreatic beta cell are not there. The pancreatic beta cell, there are lots and lots of them in the pancreas. All of those cells are measuring blood glucose and other things all the time and producing just the right amount of insulin. Now, the amount of insulin goes up and down quite a lot during the day, depending on exercise and meals in particular. And therefore, giving one shot of insulin that would then provide some sort of long basal, some sort of stable level of insulin will not mimic the body's systems for controlling blood glucose well. And there would have to be something sophisticated on top of that to handle things like meal times. And that, in a way, is why we are so interested in these biological solutions for diabetes that John Wentworth was talking about, the idea of trying to prevent or reverse the disease entirely, because it is so difficult for technology to mimic what the body's own systems do. So ideally what we would like to do is have the body's own systems do that again, take over and do that so the blood glucose control is completely normal and without the burden of giving injections and so on. Now, as Rebecca said, that's something that people thought would be achievable in the short term, but it turns out to be an extremely complicated problem, and it's something that's going to take still some years to achieve. There's one down the back there. Mm-hmm.
Hi, I have a son who's 21 and he's 10 years post-diagnosis, And as a parent, I wanted to say it's incredibly reassuring that you're doing the work that you're doing. Sorry, I didn't mean to get
No, that's right.
emotional.
No, I always think that too, you know.
But
go on.
The dilemma of these wonderful technologies not being available to kids, young people that are 21 and over. And
right.
For families, the lack of subsidy around that is a real problem that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So you know, the JDRF does a fantastic job in advocacy and for people with diabetes, as do other groups in the community, and of course these issues of access. You know, I don't think we can address them as a panel, as researchers. It's not our gig, but it's certainly the JDRF's, and they're very involved. I do agree that that a couple of things that I thought of when you were talking. I often show when I'm giving talks to medical students and so on, I show a picture of the first person in Australia to receive insulin, and her dad actually contacted Banting, who purified insulin in Toronto, and arranged for him to send insulin to Australia by ship, and which saved this young girl's life. And she went on then to become by far the person in the world who'd been treated for the longest with insulin. So I think access to new things and getting that organised is great. And I also do think that we should be very proud of our researchers here, because you know they are working on all of our behalf to move this. And one of my kids has got a serious illness. I've just been to a conference to think that focusing on that, and you think, isn't it great? There are all these people out there who are working on the illness that my kid's got. I think it's a good point to make.
I want to have Tom and the team continue, but it's such an important point. I just wanted to give you another perspective from JDRF. We're not happy with the current situation. We're not resting with the situation as it is at present. However, the situation less than a decade ago was there was no public reimbursement of any diabetes device in Australia. We now have the beginnings of a pump program that has been quadrupled in the last year, and we're not happy with that yet either, because it cuts out. We have the beginnings of CGM reimbursement, which cuts out at 21. We're not happy with that either, but there are 7,000 people now who are a bit better off than they were this time 18 months ago. And we have the beginnings of a pathway of assessment for new technologies that we're working with the government on, with Diabetes Australia and other groups, so that the next generation that doesn't look just like a pump or a sensor independently, and maybe way more complex and effective than things we've even seen so far, don't have to go through this incrementalism that we're currently working through. So I know we're not happy, but we're a lot way forward from where we could have been, but we still want to continue and extend the indication, because no one should have to have an age, a birthday, determine whether they access these things or not.
Tom, can I just add something?
Yes.
Can I just add something outside of my work with the India study? I'm a massive fan of building peer support. So one of the other things you can do when you walk away from here is go onto the JDRF website and tap into your local peers, your peer communities. As Alana said, the power that the online type 1 diabetes community has is huge. There's a lot of closed Facebook groups that also have a lot of power. I personally help support a pregnancy closed Facebook group for women with type 1 diabetes, and I encourage on any level to meet with your MPs, talk to them. There's a lot of templates for letters in terms of campaigning for subsidising CGM beyond 21 years of age. It's actually the lived experience and the power of all of you guys with type 1 diabetes that's going to create that change.
Yeah, hi, David Keenan here. I'm a type 1 diabetic. I've got 3 kids, and we're just discussing TrialNet as a family, and which we're going to go forward with it. But I guess one of the things we're sort of thinking, you're better off knowing to some extent that you have the antibodies, because then they live in this fear phase. They've seen me go through it, so they want to. But what things can we actually do about those triggers? I guess you talked about the research that's undertaking, but once someone is getting the antibodies starting to trigger in the blood, what can we actually do to help them sort of slow that process down today, let alone what we'll do in the future?
Thanks, Dave. There's some great points there. So before I hand it over to John, who's very involved in TrialNet, maybe we just flag a couple of the points you raised that I think would be great to discuss further. One is the issue of if you find out that one of your other children is going to or is not going to develop diabetes, how is that helpful or difficult? I think that's worth commenting on. Does participating in these trials of relatives, both either NDIA or in TrialNet, does that increase anxiety amongst kids or families or not? Maybe we can deal with that. Maybe we'll deal with that first, because I think there's data about that. And John, do you want to comment on that?
So TrialNet is currently the only antibody screening program we have available for families with type 1 diabetes. And the idea is that if you've got someone in your family with type 1 diabetes, other family members who don't have type 1 diabetes can go and get a blood test free of charge and work out if they've got antibodies. And if they have antibodies, they're very likely to get type 1 diabetes, and then there's a monitoring program that sets up, and there's actually intervention studies that are running to try to prevent them getting type 1 diabetes. So that's what TrialNet's about. And so we're obviously very passionate about that, because this is an important vehicle for us to try to really push the field forward. But quite rightly, not everyone wants to know, or they want to think twice about whether they will get their children screened usually, or other members of the family screened. And there are pros and cons as to getting that information. Now, clearly, if you have a blood test and there's no antibodies, that can deliver you some relief. And I don't see any downside to that apart from the time it takes you to get the blood test and the pain of having the needle stuck in your arm. But if you have antibodies, it can be quite nerve-wracking. They have done a few studies in other contexts where they've done screening programs. It's a study a bit like NDIA, where they've studied how people have reacted to the knowledge of having antibodies. And the findings of those studies are that there's an initial anxiety, and then with the monitoring and the extra information and extra support, the anxiety levels drop down to below a control population. So it is something that does cause a bit of a blip of concern for people, but there are processes in place to try to deal with that. The other thing that often is asked is, well, what does this mean for insurance? What if my kids have antibodies and then they turn 18 and they want to get life insurance or whatever? What do we do with this information, and do we need to tell the insurer? And that's a very grey area. I mean, the reality is that if an insurer says, right, do you have any background medical history, or do you have any medical information about these diseases, you would often need to disclose it. We as researchers are not required to disclose that information, but if you're asked that question on an insurance thing, you may need to put it down. So these are sorts of things people need to think about as well. And we don't have a clear answer for that. And in fact, we tell people, yes, you may need to disclose this to an insurer. I think the other thing we can say is that an insurer generally shouldn't be discriminating against people who have antibodies and are at risk of type 1 diabetes. Perhaps income protection insurance is an exception, but other people at risk of type 1 diabetes have generally the same sort of life expectancy. So they're the sorts of things, I guess, we encounter commonly. The final thing is that there is good evidence that you can prevent the situation where your child gets very, very sick before they're diagnosed, and that there is good evidence for that, and we're trying to develop local evidence to prove that point as well.
Yeah, I think my main take home from having heard that these studies presented is that concerns about anxiety in families where someone has got autoantibodies and may develop diabetes in the future, there seems to be not a high level of concern or anxiety in these studies. So I think on the whole, people respond with appropriate education and so on to these results quite well. And of course, all that's being done here is to find something that is present. It's not as if those antibodies are there or are not there, and it's mostly better to know about stuff than to be in the dark and to be worried about them without knowing that. Now, the second part of the question was what can be done. TrialNet was established in order to conduct studies of people with autoantibodies to prevent them progressing to type 1 diabetes. Now, at various times there will be studies open in Australia for people to go in to that they can enrol in TrialNet, and at other times there aren't. So let's deal first of all with are there studies open now, or will there be studies open soon in Australia in this setting? Then the other thing is, what about other things apart from trials? Is there anything you can do in this window when you might have autoantibodies? Now, I think, again, John's probably the right person to handle these questions.
Well, I'll deal with the second thing first. What can I do? I mean, we don't know of anything that works from a lifestyle point of view, or from other sort of intervention point of view, be it supplements or probiotics or what. If your child has two antibodies, to modify that natural history that of diabetes that they're experiencing. And I guess that's why these population studies, and while TrialNet's mission as well is so important to try to help us work out what are the risk factors for progression, I guess the only advice I give people is to be alert to symptoms of diabetes and get onto it quickly, but also to just to lead a healthy lifestyle as you're recommended generally. So, don't eat processed food, exercise regularly, and those sorts of general bits of advice.
And in terms of studies, the INIT study, Len Harrison and John and Peter Coleman's study of intranasal insulin, that was being conducted in this study population, not actually through TrialNet, but very much in the study population over the last several years. We're going through a window where I think there aren't probably...
No, there's a few. So I can tell you about a couple. So there's one where a drug we use for rheumatoid arthritis called abatacept is being used to prevent diabetes. There's another one we've just opened where a tablet called hydroxychloroquine that's used to treat lupus is being trialled for its ability. And again, these two things have been chosen because they are exquisitely safe. And that's the really key thing, is that we've got to have things that are safe, and safe propositions to put up for predominantly paediatric, for children who have antibodies. And so these two trials are open at the moment. There's a couple there's one's that's just finished, two insulin trials that have finished, unfortunately didn't show any benefit. And there's another one that we'll find out about next year, which was a drug called teplizumab, which was an immune therapy, caused a few early side effects, and it'll be very interesting to see whether it has delayed diabetes in the population that was tested.
Yeah, Mike. One more? Okay. Yes. Any others? Well, because here's one. Sorry. Yep. Go ahead. Maybe we can sneak in two more. See how we go.
Hi, I'm Jasmine. I've had diabetes for nearly 20 years. I'm currently going through the Austin Hospital, receiving help through their specialist clinic. Now, I'm just wondering, I know you said you're through St Vincent Hospital. Now, they don't really provide my hospital much communication to do with other hospitals' trials or things available. Is there going to be better communication between hospitals so we're aware of what we can do to help out? Like, I know you're looking for people. Like, I'd love to help. I've already tried to help through the Austin Hospital, but I wasn't eligible. So I'd just love to know if there's more communication available, basically.
Yes, great question, I think.
Well, there's two. Look, unfortunately, we do, you put the word out, and the problem with asking clinicians to find people for you is that it's not top of their priority. I mean, they're very busy, and they've got to focus on the problem they're dealing with, and having plugging research is way down the list. So we've really struggled to get the message out. But there are two particular sites you want to look at. The JDRF has a clinical research network, the CRN, that should have most of the studies going on in Australia on it. Diabetes Victoria also lists a lot of research opportunities, and you should check that out. And also, every clinical trial needs to be registered. And in Australia, that's the Australia-New Zealand Clinical Trial Registry. So if you look at Australian Clinical Trial Registration or something like that in Google, you should be able to find that site. And there you can find type 1 diabetes trials as well. So they would be the three things I would do. JDRF should be a good portal into that as well.
And Pauline's got a comment?
Yes, thanks very much. Just quickly, I'd also say to sign up at our JDRF booth for Game Changer, which is exactly talking about all clinical trials that are open, research that's happening. We encourage you to join our Game Changer group, which is what we formed to basically keep people up to date on clinical trials and research and development. Thanks.
Great. So in closing, a final comment from anyone? Louise, would you like to, is there anything we've missed here?
I just think get involved, because I've only benefited ever. Yeah.
It's a good comment. I agree with that. I think that there's natural reluctance to get involved, but I think there are a lot of benefits for individuals and for the community.
Yeah.
I would just say, in theme with Alana's presentation this morning, link in with your peer support teams. And that's a world of information. And that's like whether it's on Twitter or closed Facebook groups or face-to-face. Diabetes Victoria has them all listed as well.
Now, Shannon, I think we should hear from you because you've been doing such a good job nursing that baby.
I just think all these trials are good. That's about getting ahead of the game. Back in '86 when I got diabetes, I was pretty horrific. So anything that gets ahead of the game, and if there was, heaven forbid, that the girls had any issues, then they wouldn't have to go through what I had to go through.
Now, see on this on the screen, I don't know what's going on this screen, but Melissa Lee is the doctor who's pictured here. What's going on there, Melissa? Good, especially handsome young men like the chap on the bike. All right, Katrina or John, you anything else to say? Otherwise, we'll call it a day.
We're very, very thankful to everyone that does participate. You do give up a lot of your time to come to work, to come to our trials. So we are very grateful for that. But I'm sure the benefit, as Louise has indicated, is just extraordinary. And also, I guess, at the end of the day, if we don't have you involved, then we can't advance and get the data that we need, which is so incredibly vital to progress forward. So I truly would encourage you and thank you very much for being part of these trials and wanting to become so.
Terrific.
We're all in this together, so we're very grateful for the help, and we're doing it together as a team.
So a big round of applause for the panel.
Thank you so much to Tom and to all the members of the panel. You've seen them all now. They're available to you to answer any more of the questions that you have. And please, for them and for JDRF, hold us accountable. You support us, you enable us. You should make sure that we're delivering on the things that are important to you. So take advantage of today's forum. A couple more things before we break for morning tea. But I just want to just round out that session just by sort of painting a very, very simplistic picture. Between good science and new products and therapies has to be clinical trials. It's the way the system works. Clinical trials have to be in people like you and your family members. The Game Changer program is the way for you to sign up to be part of clinical trials. So please, sign up to the Game Changer program before you leave today, and you'll be given visibility of all of the types of things that may or may not interest you. Some may suit, but all of those are important to making sure that good things happen as quickly as possibly can be done. I'd like to invite Ellie Mae Mcguire up here. We're going to observe a minute's silence in recognition of Armistice Day at it's almost 11 o'clock on the dot, something that I think reflects a much broader community recognition that will be going on for absolutely incredible reasons that we can reflect upon. But also just think in passing that at this time, 100 years ago, we didn't have insulin yet. That's another 100th anniversary coming up soon. We don't want to celebrate too many more of them. But for this moment in time, we'll just take a minute's silence with Ellie Mae reading the ode to reflect our recognition.
Thank you, Mike. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor years condemn. As the going down of the sun, and in the morning we will remember them.
Thank you, Ellie Mae. Two quick things about Ellie Mae before we break for lunch. And Alana, do you want to come up and get ready for a photo? One thing you may not know about Ellie Mae, she was a finalist in the Stall Gift in 2013. I only found it out this morning. That's an incredible achievement. And the second thing is that she is one of the lead advocates in our advocacy program, which I'll tell you about in just a minute. But before we do that, Alana's going to take a photo of this group that we're going to use in just a moment. So when Alana, who's our social media and marketing expert, asks you, if you make a bit of noise, show a bit of enthusiasm for the Type 1 Summit, and we'll tell you what we're going to do with that photo shortly.
All right, I'm going to try and get as many people in as I can. So on 3, everyone just give me a big cheer. 3, 2, 1.
There we go.
Thank
Feel
you.
that? Thanks. So one of the things that Tom also mentioned was our clinical research network. Who's heard of our CRN? Good. Well, I'll tell you a bit more about it. The clinical research network is also part of that picture of good science turning into the sorts of things that make life better, safer and easier every day, and eventually a cure. It's the way in which we get the projects and the opportunities that Tom and the panel mentioned happening. We have $35 million of government monies that we got out of 2 elections ago, on top of $5 million the election before that, all of which has gone into research progress in Australia. We're now after $50 million more. And so that would see the next wave of projects clinically supported in Australia, and that network continued. That's only happening because we've got advocacy going on all around the country and have done for many, many years. And today, we want to make you part of that advocacy activity. So as a brief sideline to the summit, Alana's just in the process of posting on Facebook and on Twitter that photo with a little commentary from JDRF about how important it is that the CRN gets its next boost of funding as part of this election campaign. A number of advocates have met with MPs. We've been to Canberra as a group. The size of the group that went to Canberra this time and the last few elections was less than half the size of people in this room. So don't think that this room can't have a difference. This is twice as many people as we've taken to Canberra and come back with $35 million before. So if you do have Facebook, if you do have a Twitter handle, if you have the ability to go on and take the post that we have almost posted, just about to post, and share it as broadly and widely as you can. This is your 2 minutes so that when you see an announcement made, hopefully by both sides of Parliament between now and the election, of $50 million of support, you can say, maybe it was my retweet. Maybe it was my sharing of that post that helped make that happen, and you should feel part of the journey that we've had for 3.5 years now in advance of this election. So in just a moment, I'll give you the thumbs up. We're thumbs up, we're on? Yep. Facebook's up and Twitter's gone? Twitter's just about to be up, but Facebook's up now. Great. So if you have a moment, and then when you're done, this is our way of staggering the departure from the room too, because some of you will be a bit slower in getting to your posting and your retweeting, and some don't even know what I'm talking about and can just walk out. And then there's morning tea outside, and we'll reconvene for the other sessions after morning tea. So thank you everybody for being here. Take a moment to retweet or post, share our post, and thank you for being part of the Type 1 Summit.